Diversity.
You have caused confusion.
Fascist moron.
Well, hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to run you through my top 10 comic strips in the Beano and the Dandy. Before I start, I did say I would make a follow-up to the Carry On definitive guide I did if it reached over 10,000 views. Well, at the time of recording, it has not done that. See, it's stuck on 8.4 thousand views, and therefore no Carry On follow-up, although I do have a lot of Carry On material here. If that ever creeps over 10,000, then there will be a Carry On follow-up. Okay, so let us make a start then. The Beano and the Dandy. These were two big parts of my childhood in the 80s when I was 6, 7, 8. I'd spend many an hour up with my lights on up in my little bunk bed, reading this under the covers when I should have been sleeping. And I had a lot of the Beano and the Dandy annuals. I've been trying to explore what I'm calling British vernacular popular culture. Well, DC Thompson, the publisher based up in Scotland, have kept these, or the Beano is still going, I believe. The Dandy, I think, only comes out as an annual now. But this is one of those things that, again, relatively big in this country, popular, and not especially ratified by the establishment in many ways. But yeah, I remember many a time in the 1980s, you'd go to a car boot sale or a jumble sale or something like that. These days, it would be more like a charity store. And you'll see an old Beano annual from 1972, or it's the Dandy from 1981, and many a time I would get to pick up an old Beano annual or an old Dandy annual, and I had quite a lot of them. I also, for a period, got the weekly comics, but I have to say more. It was the annuals for me, the Beano book. I can't remember what the Dandy one was called, the Dandy annual and the Beano book. Yeah, I mean, they were just a part of being a kid in this country in the 80s. And I have fond memories of reading them. I'm also kind of interested by some of the ways in which they show a difference in the attitude in the culture at the time. One of the things I'll say about the Beano and the Dandy before I get to the list is that, these were little boys' things. I'm not sure how many girls ever read the Beano or the Dandy, but to me, it was kind of rough and tumble. There's a kind of violence to the anarchy in it. There's bullying. There's it's the rough and tumble of the schoolyard, in comic book form. And there was also this constant war between either the kids and the teacher, or the kid and their father often. And many of the characters they'd get a slipper, or they'd get the cane or something like that, and this was just seen as natural and normal, and as kind of part of what it was to be a kid. And of course, all of those things over time have been sanitized, taken away, frowned upon as the culture has become more feminized. And in some ways, I mean, I don't know what the little boys of today read, but I'm led to believe that even the Beano and the Dandy are much toned down when it comes to this sort of thing. Whereas for me, they were formative parts of my entire mindset. So, and I mean, again, I think for the better rather than for the worse. So anyway, let's take a little look at my top 10 list here. I should say that even though I mentioned that, the elites did not particularly like it, one fan of the Beano and the Dandy was Margaret Thatcher. who sent them this letter in the 80s on their 50th anniversary. So they were celebrating that in one of these annuals I had a look at for the purposes of making this video. All right. The last thing I'll say before I get into my top 10 is that, how can I put this? This is going to be a very personal top 10, not necessarily the top 10 most iconic characters. I was always a kid who I never kind of liked the character that you were meant to like. For example, you can see Dennis the Menace there. I was never that big on Dennis. Desperate Dan is not in my top 10 at all. Minnie the Minx is another one that you were meant to like that I didn't like. I mean, I was a sort of kid that I remember Alvin and the Chipmunks. You were meant to like Alvin. I liked Simon. Simon was into science and he was clever. Turtles. You were meant to like Michelangelo and Raphael. Mainly Michelangelo was the cool one, right? I like Donatello. He was the one who did machines and read his books and so on. So you can see a kind of general pattern that I tended to identify with the more intellectual characters. And it was often not the characters who were pushed in your face were the ones that I took to. That said, there are some big names in here, but I just thought I'd give that caveat up front. You should, rather than kind of moan at my top 10, which is subjective and personal, if you were a fan of these when you were growing up, you should just give me your top 10. Like, who would your top 10 characters be? I will also say that between the Beano and the Dandy, the Beano was very much the Coca-Cola and Dandy was the Pepsi. Dandy was the number 2 brand, the upstart, the rival. And I'm not even sure whether I understood fully when I was a child that these were made by the same company or that they existed in the same universe. You did occasionally see crossovers like Desperate Dan cropping up with Dennis or whatever, but I guess in my mind I thought it was more like Marvel and DC or something like that. Wasn't fully cognizant that they were the same thing, if that makes any sense. But looking back, it's very obvious now. Anyway.
Order now from the academic agency.
With all of that said, my number 10 character here, or comic strip, is a forgotten character, Keyhole Kate. She was kind of in the older ones. When I was a kid, I had ones from the 70s, maybe even some going back to the 60s. It really depends on what cropped up at these, car boot sales, as I mentioned. That was the sort of thing where I'd pick up older annuals. But really, the eras I remember were probably the 70s annuals and obviously the 80s when I was a kid reading these. By the time I got to the 1990s, I got a bit of it from my brother who's younger than me. So I kind of went into the early bit of the 90s. But obviously, by that point, I was a teenager and I was a bit kind of old to read Beano and Dandy by then. But I remember Keyhole Kate. And I just kind of like the kind of fishy kind of... I've always been into the idea of a sly sneak, and Keyhole Kate was obviously one of those. Look at her big nose. I've always loved big noses and kind of sneaking around corners and things like that. I'm kind of reminded at a time when I looked through a keyhole when I was a kid, and it was one of those like old-fashioned keyholes, just like the ones you can see there with the bigger key. And I was looking through it, and somebody put the key in, and it kind of hit me in the key went in my eye, and I still have a mark just under my eye where that key hit me. So that's kind of neither here nor there when it comes to Keyhole Kate, but it just kind of reminded me of that. So yes, Keyhole Kate. Uh, I mean, it's kind of a narrow gimmick for a character that she looks through keyholes because she's really nosy. But something about that character tickled me, and I remember, those little ones standing out when I was going through. She wasn't always in them. I don't know if she was phased out, Keyhole Kate. In this kind of retrospective book that I've taken this screenshot from, there's a picture of Cilla Black, and Cilla Black is saying that she was so skinny when she was younger that she was called Keyhole Kate. So it's a kind of a strange tie-in. There's in this particular one where I took the Margaret Thatcher pick from, there's there's a lot of kind of interesting bits, including a page where Jimmy Savile is there. So yeah. Anyway, number 9 is Winker Watson. Now, again, one of the things I liked about Winker Watson, it had that slightly older style. I always thought that Winker Watson was like from the 1950s or something. Turns out he was always a contemporary character. They just made it look like, a school from the 50s or something like that. And I don't know, something about the idea of the Wangler. They always called him, the notorious Wangler, Winker Watson. In my mind, when I was a kid, he was kind of like a second-rate Roger the Dodger in a way. And in fact, whenever they do Beano Dandy stuff, they tend to put Roger the Dodger with Winker Watson as kind of teasing apart in a way. But yeah, they were reasonably quite entertaining, the Winker Watson stories. I like the idea of the cheeky little schoolboy, and I also just love the idea that the world is frozen in like 1950, where the where the Mr. Creep where's the mortarboard there, and it's this. I don't know. I've always liked the idea of things being frozen in 1950, and the world of Winker Watson certainly was. So he's my number 9. Number 8 is a bit of a cheat. It's Bananaman. Now I believe that Bananaman was in the Dandy, if I'm mistaken, and nowadays, because the Dandy is no longer a thing, he is in the Beano. He may have even started off in a different comic. I'll just double check that. But the reason why this is a bit of a cheat is that my main memory of Bananaman, so he appeared in something called Nutty, and then transferred over to the Dandy at some point. So I remember Bananaman much more for the TV show. There was a cartoon that aired when I was a kid, and Bananaman, it was voiced by the Goodies. It was like Bill Oddie and the other members of the Goodies, and I just thought it was a lot of fun. Yes, I'm trying to remember now who the other voice actors were in that. Tim Brooke Taylor, Graham Garden, and Bill Oddie. Also known as the Goodies. That's a lovely slice of late 80s Britain, that cartoon Bananaman. And they really captured something of the feel of the comic in there. But yeah, he was in the comics as well. I always just felt that Bananaman feels like he stands apart from the rest of the DC Thompson universe, maybe because of that cartoon, but he doesn't feel very integrated into the kind of general world, so it feels like a cheat. But I'm a fan of Bananaman, kind of funny stuff. Number 7 is also a bit of a cheat because the Numskulls appeared in a magazine called The Beezer, which was also published by DC Thompson. And at some point, the Beezer went out of business or was closed down, and the Numskulls transferred over, I think, to the Beano, where it is still today. I'll have a look here. Yeah, so it was previously in the Beezer, then it transferred over to the Dandy, and now, in the current day, it is in the Beano. And I've always loved this idea of the various different depths inside the brain. I know there's that movie Inside Out that kind of took this idea on. There's also a skit from a Woody Allen movie which takes this basic idea. Um, but I've always been taken by the idea of the little controllers inside the head. And Numskull's got a different style of art as well. And I always just had fun reading those. So I've got fond memories of the Numskulls. But the basic concept is one, I take to. Number 6 is Calamity James, the world's unluckiest boy. This also had a really different feeling art style. I think Calamity James was in the Beano. Correct me if I'm wrong. And my God, did this boy have some bad luck? I mean, he really did. He really did. Speedo. Calamity James is Beano, but how he wasn't suicidal. I mean, he really had. Like, they put him through the absolute ringer, and there was almost like a slightly depressing feel to the Calamity James stories. And they didn't pull back on how misfortune. The only person who had a worse life than Calamity James is probably Ian Beale on EastEnders, which will be another Friday video by me at some point, because Ian Beale is a fascinating character. But Calamity James is kind of like the Ian Beale of the Beano universe, and there was something about the style of these ones that felt different when I was reading through them as a kid. Number 5, a little bit forgotten, I think. These were in the Dandy, the Jocks and the Geordies. The Jocks and the Geordies, they were always having these kind of all-out kind of wars with each other at the Scottish border. So obviously the Geordies up in Newcastle, the Jocks were Scots, and they were just mortal enemies. And they had a lot of fun with the Jocks, and they kind of moved around different periods, and they'd reenact battles. Like, it'd be like one week they'd be in Waterloo, another time they'd be reenacting a medieval battle or something. And it was real boy stuff, You can just see from the stills here the level of violence between the Jocks and the Geordies. They literally just smashing each other in the nose. And they were always getting engaged in tugs of war, and I've kind of a level of kind of cartoon violence, an element of maybe Bugs Bunny versus Yosemite Sam, that kind of thing. But I always had great fun, and usually when I'd get a Dandy, I would beeline to the Jocks and the Geordies. That was my favourite in there, I think. And I can't remember, but I think that might be the highest rated Dandy strip. I'm pretty much sure it's all Beano from here on. Oh no, hold on. These were in the Dandy too. Buddy Beef and Chips were in the Dandy as well. And I mean, anybody who's a long-time fan of this channel will know that I have peculiar views on bullying. I have made controversial arguments in the past that there is a social utility to bullying, let's just say. And one of the good things about Buddy Beef and Chips, of course, is that Chips would always come out on top. But I also like the senseless kind of arbitrariness of Buddy Beef's attacks on Chips. You can see in this one, look, I mean, Chips is just minding his own business, hammering a nail in. Buddy Beef comes along and, of course, grabs him by the arm, squeezes his hand, etc. But then by the end of the strip, Chips would have got his revenge. And usually the revenge was much harsher than the initial crime of Buddy Beef. The other thing I like about this is that it's a different flavor of bullying, because Buddy Beef was just arbitrary, like wanton sadism for its own sake. Whereas a lot of the other bullying that you see, there's an actual reason for it. So in the Bash Street Kids, the teacher's pet often was the one who'd get bullied, but that's because he was a teacher's pet and he kind of deserved it, In Dennis the Menace, Walter the Softie was a pansy, and he generally deserved his bullying. whereas Chips didn't really deserve his bullying as much. And Bully Beef almost certainly deserved the comeback. Now, I read on the Wikipedia that in later years, Chips got so sadistic in his comebacks that there was a kind of faction of the fandom that had become pro Bully Beef over time, because Bully Beef really kind of got his desserts a bit too much, which is kind of interesting as well. Number 3, and this may be a bit of a shock to some because clearly Dennis the Menace is the #1 Beano cover star and has been since the late 60s. I think it was Biffo before that, and that ostrich thing before Biffo. But yeah, I mean, I was never big on Dennis. I didn't like Nasha. I didn't like the vibe of Dennis in general. My favorite part of the Dennis stories was his kind of feud with Walter the Softy and his little gang of pansies. I think it was like Walter and the Pansies. I can't remember what the name. We're all friends of flowers, it says here. He had these 2 little friends. I can't remember their names now. And they were always kind of like doing gay little things, like having picnics on the side and stuff like that. And sadistic Dennis would just kind of, he'd go and like kick sand in Walter's eyes, serves him right for trying to have a picnic like a gay lord type thing. And I don't know, there was something about this, low level class warfare that Dennis wrought on Walter, and the kind of corrective, like Walter was feminine and clearly coded as being gay in some way, and this was like justly punished by Dennis and his thug mates, basically. That was my favorite part of the Dennis stories. I'm led to believe that has all been toned down now, or they've like Walter's got a girlfriend or something, or the bullying is not as intense. But I much prefer those Dennis stories versus the stories of Dennis winding his dad up. In fact, Minnie the Minx, who was basically like a kind of gender swapped female version of Dennis in many ways, her storylines antagonizing her dad were probably better than Dennis's antagonizing his dad. Dennis was generally better out in the world, especially when he was kicking the shit out of Walter. So yeah, it was the bullying aspects I liked mainly. Now, probably my favorite single character in the Beano was Roger the Dodger, and like I was saying, I liked Simon from Alvin and the Chipmunks, or Donatello. I fancied myself as a little thinking man. I always went for the thinking man's choice, and Roger the Dodger in many ways was the thinking man's Beano character. He had a lot of books. It was always suggested that he had stacks and stacks of books, and his books were filled with dodges, which is really quite a ridiculous concept when you think of it. Think of all the things that could possibly happen. Think of all the jobs that your dad could give you, and then there is a dodge for that task that you've been given. And these books are full of ingenious ways to get out of doing a chore. Basically, that was Roger's gimmick. But I mean, I kind of like the idea of this, more kind of intellectual mischief maker in a way. I would also say that Roger the Dodger, more than any other character, tended to get the slipper from his dad. There's his dad there, the one with the white hair there. Most of the time, Roger would be caught out, and the final panel would be Roger getting the slipper. So he didn't get away with his dodges very often. But there was there seemed to be good attention to detail in the Roger comics, especially whenever he's got a library or a bookshelf. They put a lot of little Easter eggs in there, which was just lovely to read. You can spend time poring over each of the little panels. So Roger was good for that. So he was one of my favorites. But my absolute favorite comic strip was obviously the Bash Street Kids. To to me, the absolute essence of these comics and the essence of the Beano was in the Bash Street Kids and their various kind of psychological battles with their teacher. And at some points, the teacher's pet, whose name was Cuthbert. I really liked these. I mean, there was what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 core Bash Street Kids, and one of the, I mean, like I was just saying with Roger the Dodger, all the different bits of detail. One of the things that was amazing about Bash Street Kids is that you could just look at the art, and there was so much going on. There was usually like there'd be all sorts of miniature little stories happening within the overall story. Like let's say in the foreground, the teacher could be telling off one of the kids, but in the background, these two are up to something else. I also think that they have good characterization. Like each of the there's Fatty and there's Plug and Sydney, and they've all got their own thing. One of the things I remember being obsessed with is this one here, whose name escapes me now, the one with the jumper up, his nose is over the jumper. I always wanted to see his neck. I wanted to see what would happen if you'd pull that down to see if what his neck would look like. And I don't recall ever happening, and I always wanted it to happen. I always wanted to, because it's almost like wanting to see a turtle out of its shell or something, yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of them now. While I'm still recording, let's get the names down of the core Bash Street Kids. So Danny is the one. Yeah, Danny is that one there with the skull and bones, I think. He's the one with the skull and bones. Ebert is the short-sighted one with the glasses there. We've got Fatty, obviously. Apparently they tried to rename him Freddy to stop children calling other kids Fatty. Gay. But I mean, forget about the modern ones. We're talking about what the comic was in the 70s, 80s, possibly even into the 90s as well. That's Fatty. Plug is the big ugly one in the middle. Toots is the tomboy on the right. That's the girl. Sydney is Toots' younger brother. This one there next to Danny. Smithy is... which one is Smithy then? Smithy is the one with the tie there. Basically, he's a bit of an idiot, Smithy. He's like thick as mince. So that one's Smithy. Spotty is the one with the spots. Apparently, he's been renamed to Scotty. Disgusting. His name's Spotty, let's face it, with a very long tie. And I'm just remembering now in school, there was a period where people really loved to wear the very long tie like that. And other times, there was a fashion to wear a very short tie, where it's almost like people had a competition to get the shortest tie possible. So there was at different times there was the long tie and the short tie, but Spotty, the original long tie merchant there. Wilfred is the one hidden behind the green jumper, resembling a tortoise. Yeah, he loves turtles. Yes, his neck is never seen. When he removes his jumper, his vest is just as high. So there we go. We never got to see Wilfred's neck. I think that's the intention. I think it makes you curious to want to see his neck, and you never get to see it. Cuthbert is the teacher's pet, not pictured here. And then there are kind of modern diversity higher versions, which we don't need to get into. So anyway, to me, easily the best of the strips is always the Bash Street Kids. And it's that quality of so much going on that I talked about before, and the general sense of mayhem always as well. Very cozy to me. I was reading the Bash Street Kids. All right, give me your top 10. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you again next week. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the Trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic, and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out.